Howdy folks, and welcome back to World of Tanks with the mighty Jingles, and today's video is going to be slightly different to the usual World of Tanks video that I feature here on the channel. It's more of an opinion piece than a commentary on a World of Tanks battle. Today I'm going to be talking about an issue that arose in World of Tanks just a couple of days before I headed out to Russia last week to broadcast the World of Warships King of the Sea tournament. And of course we're talking about a news post that World of Tanks published on the 21st of May entitled Perfecting Preferential Premiums. This issue has received a lot of coverage over the course of the last week. The relevant forum thread on the World of Tanks EU official forums at the time of recording this video is currently up to 143 pages of comments. Most of them not particularly happy. Why is that, Jingles? Well, you're probably aware of the situation by now, but for those of you who aren't, we'll just summarise the various relevant points. A little over a year ago, World of Tanks upgraded to version 9.18, introducing important enhancements to the game's matchmaker. As opposed to its predecessor, the new version's functionality was based on several templates that regulated pre-battle team formation. Since then, the tool has gone through several changes until it reached a level of performance that met the expectations of both the community and the dev team. Well, I'm not so sure about that. I keep seeing no end of complaints about the 357 matchmaker in particular, so while it might be meeting the expectations of the dev team, I think it's a bit of a stretch to say that it's meeting the expectations of the community as well. But, well, you know, for the sake of the argument, we're going to let that one slide. So, now that the game has proper team distribution, mismatches are a rare case. Everyone's happy, right? Not really. The new approach benefited everyone apart from preferential premium vehicles. So what are preferential premium vehicles? Well, luckily, they go on to explain. With preferential Tier 8 premiums, you won't encounter an opponent higher than Tier 9, which should make life easier. Regular matchmaking, once you reach the mid-tiers, is a +2 tier spread in both directions, up and down. But with preferential matchmaking tanks, tanks like the TOG-2, tanks like the KV-5, while you can, theoretically, still see tanks 2 tiers lower than you won't ever see anything more than 1 tier higher than you. And people knew this when they bought these tanks. That was part of the attraction of buying a preferential matchmaking tank. Now, Wargaming have made no secret for a long time now of the fact that they don't actually like preferential matchmaking for any premium tanks, whether they be tier 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, whatever. In fact, it's been a very long time since Wargaming have released any new premium tanks at any tier, not just tier 8, that came with preferential matchmaking. I cannot remember exactly when the last preferential matchmaking tank was released. I think it may have been the E25. And I can't remember when the E25 was released exactly, but I know it was actually removed from sale on the 22nd of December 2014, which is 3.5 years ago. So this dislike of preferential matchmaking tanks is not something that's new. It's not even a secret. And it goes back way further than any changes to the matchmaker introduced in patch 9.18 just over a year ago. But it's these matchmaking changes in patch 9.18 that are being held up as the reason for why preferential matchmaking tanks need to change. Wargaming states that the patch 9.18 matchmaker, the infamous 357 matchmaking tool, struggles finding matches for preferential premium tier 8s. It takes more time and computations for the tool to balance them properly, which extends queuing time. I've been watching a couple of videos on this subject from other YouTubers. In particular, Klaus Kellerman did a video, which I highly recommend. I'll put the link down below in the video description. Klaus Kellerman's contains a rant of epic proportions, and is well worth watching for that alone. But I also watched Quickie Baby's video on this subject, which I also recommend. As you'd expect of Quickie Baby, he's a lot more calm and reasonable, and he goes into a much greater in-depth analysis of the issues. But what I found particularly interesting while watching Quickie Baby's video wasn't actually the video itself, although it is very good, and you can check it out at the link below in the video description. But it was one of the comments made on the video by one of his subscribers who goes by the name of Matt. He's been doing some digging and some analysis into the numbers. Matt gathered a bunch of statistics from VBaddict.net over the last 30 days of World of Tanks, and he came up with some very interesting numbers. Total tanks in battles over the last 30 days, 12.465 million. Total Tier 8 tank appearances, 3.7 million. Total Tier 8 preferential matchmaking appearances, 176,000. 176,000 appearances out of nearly 12.5 million tanks in battle. That's about 1.4%, even if you add in the Tier 7 preferential matchmaking tanks like the E25, it's still less than 2% of the total tanks played. If less than 2% of the tanks that are being played over the course of 30 days in any given time in World of Tanks' lifetime are causing so many problems for your matchmaker, I'm going to go out on a limb here and suggest that the problem isn't with the tanks, it's with the matchmaker. Speaking of the matchmaker, Wargaming also claimed that these 176,000 preferential matchmaking Tier 8 premiums of the nearly 12.5 million tanks played are causing an excessive number, their words, of Tier 9 tanks to be dragged into Tier 8 games in order to accommodate all of the Tier 8 preferential matchmaking tanks. And it's that phrase, an excessive number of Tier 9 tanks, which has really put Klaus Kellerman's back up in his video. And I'm sure anybody who drives preferential Tier 8 premium matchmaking tanks will agree that situations like this, where there are no Tier 9 tanks in your game, are the exception rather than the rule, and is the reason why so many KV5s and IS6s, to name but two, are currently gathering dust in people's garages, because KV5 and IS6 drivers are starting to get really sick and tired of constantly being forced to fight T95s, E50s and T54s. But Jingles, these tanks should consider themselves lucky that they only have to fight E50s, T54s and T95s on a regular basis. Other Tier 8s, like the IS3 for example, have to fight E100s and Object 140s, and if they're really unlucky, Object 264 V2s. Yeah, that's true. But here's the thing about other Tier 8s, like the IS3. It has better penetration with standard ammunition than the KV5 and the IS6 have with gold. The IS6's gun only has 175mm of penetration. The KV5's gun only has 167. Only 219 with APCR, which is still less than the 225mm that the IS3 gets with its standard armor-piercing ammunition. You couldn't possibly expect a KV5 or an IS6 to be even slightly competitive in a Tier 10 battle. Their guns just aren't good enough. Don't worry, say Wargaming, we hear you, we have the situation covered. And this is what they're proposing to do with the KV5 as the test bed. This is why they're calling it perfecting preferential matchmaking tanks. The plan is for the KV5 to be buffed. The KV5's 107mm gun is receiving a DPM buff up to 2,300 damage per minute. It's receiving a damage per shot buff up to 330 from 300. It's getting a substantial penetration buff for its regular ammo up to 218, and a substantial penetration buff for its premium ammunition up to 243mm. That's not all. Its frontal armour is also receiving a bit of an upgrade. To cut a long story short, the front of the KV5 is being buffed almost everywhere to 220mm of armour, except for the weak spots, which are merely going to be 200mm of armour. However, Wargaming giveth, and Wargaming also taketh away. The side and rear armour of the KV5 is being nerfed drastically, in some cases by up to as much as 150mm less armour. All of which has the effect of rendering the KV5 extremely vulnerable to even Tier 6 tanks if they manage to get around the sides and rear. So, not everybody's going to like this, of course, but once again, Wargaming have you covered, and it's this in particular which has led to nearly 150 pages of complaints on the official forum thread related to this subject. Klaus Kellerman is referring to this as what he calls a Russian refund, and basically it's this. If you do not like the changes that have been inflicted upon your KV5, you may exchange the tank for another Tier 8 tank, and it shouldn't cost you any more than 2,000 gold. What? Seriously? Yes, I'm afraid, yes, seriously. They're going to charge you gold if you don't like the changes to the tank that you paid money for. You can exchange it for another tank for a small fee. This is what Klaus Kellerman famously refers to as a Russian refund. If you don't like it, well, tough. Pay us. To be fair to Wargaming, there is some method to their madness. You see, the thing is, the KV5 is valued at 7,500 gold. If you don't like the changes that are being made to the KV5, you can exchange it for another tank like the T-34, for example, which is valued at substantially more than 7,500 gold, and so this is why Wargaming is saying you can exchange the tank for another tier 8, but you may have to pay a surcharge, which shouldn't exceed 2,000 gold. However, and I have to give thanks to Quickie Baby for this little bit of data mining, is the KV5 valued at 7,500 gold? Because the last time it was Collector's Gem of the Month, they weren't selling it for gold, they were selling it for real money. And the amount of money that they were charging for the tank, which also included 3,000 gold as part of the bundle, well, if you were to take that price and see how much gold you could buy with that price, it actually comes to 11,100. Minus the 3,000 gold, which came as part of the bundle, and it's not 7,500, it's 8,100. So they were actually charging 8,100 gold, effectively, or overpricing the KV5 when it was available as Collector's Gem of the Month. But they're only valuing it 7,500 for the purposes of exchanging it if you don't like what's happening to it as a result of these changes. You see, when I got my KV5, I bought it shortly before it was removed from sale, many years ago. It was available in the tech tree, and it did cost 7,500. But there are probably a lot of people out there who took the opportunity to buy it as Collector's Gem of the Month, since it hadn't been available on sale for quite some time, and they actually paid more than 7,500 gold for it. But regardless of how much you did or didn't pay for your KV5 or your IS-6 or any number of premium tanks that have preferential matchmaking, you're no longer going to be able to enjoy the benefits of that preferential matchmaking, which, let's face it, under the new matchmaker basically means you get to fight lots of tier 9s, and instead you're going to enjoy the opportunity to get shit on by a whole bunch of tier 10s, just like all the rest of the tier 8s in your garage. And if you don't like it, well, you can always exchange your KV5 for something else. For a small fee, of course, which, depending on when you got your KV5, whether you bought it for 7,500 gold in the tech tree, or you bought it for a substantially inflated price when it was Collector's Gem of the Month, may or may not result in your being ripped off to the tune of a couple of thousand gold. Now, regardless of how you feel about this issue, the one thing that I am not buying for a second is that these changes are necessary as a result of the infamous 357 matchmaker that was introduced just over a year ago in patch 9.18. Wargaming have been banging on about preferential matchmaking tanks and their obvious dislike for them for at least 2.5 to 3 years prior to the introduction of patch 9.18. Well, actually I should qualify that statement. They haven't released any new preferential matchmaking tanks for around about 3.5 years. But they're still entirely happy to sell them. In fact, just a week after the Perfecting Preferential Matchmaking post went up, where Wargaming explained what they wanted to do and announced that they were going to be trialling it on the KV5, this appeared in the premium shop. The M6A2E1 Ultimate, yours for only £42.77. A premium matchmaking tier 8 tank. Really? Yeah, really. And it's not just the M6A2E1. If you were to go to the premium shop, at least on the EU cluster right now, there are a dozen different preferential matchmaking tanks on sale. Currently, for the low price of £36.52, you can be the proud owner of the Russian premium tier 8 preferential matchmaking heavy tank, the IS-6. Or you can buy yourself the Chinese premium tier 8 preferential matchmaking heavy tank, the 112, for only £32.93. They're also selling the 88mm Pak 43 Jagdtiger, the AMX CDC, the STA2, the Super Pershing, the AT-15A, the Panther M10, the M56 Scorpion, the heavy tank number 6. The list goes on and on and on. We've got the Batilda Black Prince, the Excelsior, around about a dozen preferential matchmaking tanks. It turns out that Wargaming are entirely happy to take your money for these things, regardless of what their stated opinion of preferential matchmaking is, with the proviso that they're going to change them and charge you a small fee for the privilege if you don't like it. So it's not a great time to be an owner of a preferential matchmaking premium tank, particularly tier 8. As it is, tier 8s like the IS-6 and the KV-5 have been struggling for a very long time. Power creep has been a serious issue around Tier 8. Tanks like the KV-5 and the IS-6 at the moment don't have to fight Tier 10 tanks, but to all intents and purposes they've been fighting tanks with Tier 10 armour and tanks with Tier 10 guns for quite some time. So regardless of your opinions on this subject, one thing that we can guarantee is that there are some interesting times ahead for owners of preferential matchmaking tanks, particularly at Tier 8. Let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.